page. I know the page numbers by now. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So sitting here, a profound motivation for listening to the teachings, and we'll start off here as we have this advice for from Kandrila for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's continuing health and any health obstacles to be removed. So as most recently, Kandrila has said to recite the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer, take every opportunity when we're here together to be able to accumulate some recitations of that. So we just recited the one for listening to the Dharma. And so then in terms of the general refuge prayer, instead of listening to the Dharma, we say, by my practice of generosity and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. It is there on page 28. Oh, I didn't know if it was in this book. I'm getting familiar with it. Good. Well, it's on page 28. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to Buddha, Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So we can continue recitations of that silently together, and I'll go around the mala and then we'll see how we go. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So just staying with this verse, for a little bit longer, which would be helpful if I actually open the page. So because the translations can be, variable. So here it says, this is the refuge and bodhicitta formula, as it said, that is a transmission from Lama Atisha, who composed the Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment, which gathered together what we study in terms of the path to enlightenment according to the Lam Rim presentation, the graduated path to enlightenment. And so here, where it says, may I become a Buddha to benefit, first line, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So this is a unique Mahayana refuge of saying, until I'm enlightened. We have the common prayer of refuge that's in the Guru Puja as well, Namo Guru Bhye, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya. And so that's paying homage to the Guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. So that's the sort of common shared with all, and with all, all people who, formally take that commitment to be Buddhist and so forth, take refuge. And that's for the duration of this life. But what we're saying here is until I'm enlightened. So that's lifetime to lifetime up until enlightenment. Generally, when you take refuge formally, it is instructed that it is for this life, because that's how the Buddha taught that. That's what we were looking at the end of last time, looking at the small scope. So until I reach enlightenment means, and with a great compassion, altruism for all sentient beings, may become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So having this irreversible motivation, which is a huge motivation, and strong faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which the objects of refuge and the states of mind we want to develop for ourselves, on the basis of very clear, strong, lucid faith. And that's common. That's the common. So we talk about, when we say faith of conviction, of having checked out the Buddha's teachings, not just blindly following. And so that's common to all schools of Buddhism. But it's where we look at the other aspect of taking refuge is based on fear, right? We say, oh, yes, I identify with that one, the fear. And, we have this formula of 3 times and saying with our hands respectfully in prostration mudra, having a sort of respectful physical conduct. And those of you who perhaps taken refuge in a refuge ceremony where it might say kneel on one knee, but actually in the Tibetan, there's no instruction to kneel on one knee. It's a relief. It does say to kneel, which could be both knees, or alternatively to squat. Interesting, isn't it? Anyway, the idea is that we're respectfully, even if we're sitting or, that we're respectfully offering prostration mudra. And so where it differs in terms of goal, in terms of the 3 scopes of the whole of the Lam Rim presentation, is the first level of fear, as we were looking at previously, is the fear of being reborn in lower realms. So not wanting, in having investigated the or familiarized to some extent with the hell realms, with the hungry ghost realm, constant craving, with the animal realm full of fear, don't want to be reborn then. So that sort of sense of fear motivates, plus the faith motivates people on the small scope, the initial scope to take refuge. And then the second level of fear, which relates to where we're discussing today, the middling or intermediate scope, is a fear of being reborn anywhere, or of having the suffering of anywhere in samsara, lower realms, higher realms, they're all got their own levels of suffering. And so wanting to be protected from that and having faith that the objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can do that. And then the third level is the Mahayana, as we say, the great scope, which is literally what, Maha means great and Yana means vehicle, great vehicle, which we're looking at subsequently. And this is a fear of the two extremes of both samsara and nirvana. So wishing to, and not only for ourselves, wishing to protect all sentient beings from that. So the extreme of existence is the, of wanting to be protected from samsara. So that's in common with the middle scope. But the extreme of nirvana is not wanting to abide forever in this peaceful, blissful state, which already sounds quite attractive, right? And so wanting to be protected from that, which only benefits myself, which is great. But then what is unique in the Mahayana is saying, no, and on the basis of great compassion, I'm not satisfied to remain in that state of personal peace, but I want to become enlightened. So this element of great compassion in your mind is what motivates, and when we say this refuge and bodhicitta prayer. So we got up to last time looking at refuge and bodhicitta and just wanted to unpack that. The Lam Rim gives a whole lot of detail. The Lam, like a great treatise on the path and so forth. It elaborates on how to go for refuge, the benefits of that, the causes of going for refuge, and the results of that. And of course, that's a module we'll be looking at further down the track, which I can say at the moment quite frequently. Okay, so that's just unpacking that, so we can see that in and of itself, that refuge and bodhicitta prayer and contemplating that is so rich and meaningful, and we can think about it as encompassing the whole graduated path to enlightenment. Okay, so that brings us to where we are investigating today, the intermediate scope, the medium scope, the middle scope, the one in the middle. So on the basis of having investigated and contemplated all the points presented in the initial scope, which we said was, turning away from worldly affairs of this life and wanting to have a higher rebirth, which is already, incredibly huge. Incredibly huge motivation and aspiration. So the medium scope is expanding our notion of what is possible in terms of using this precious human rebirth. What is to encourage us to strive for a sense of complete liberation, freedom from suffering and its causes. So suffering and its causes is a reference to the Four Noble Truths. So this is where this is presented in the medium scope, but particularly in relation to the first two, truth of suffering and true origins. So it particularly emphasizes that, and thinking that, it is possible to be free completely of suffering and its causes. So we have to develop a conviction in that and not settling for anything less than that. So this is called the determination to be free, or the mind intent on liberation, or we say renunciation, and we have to look at what we mean by renunciation. It literally means this mind of definite emergence, really wanting to definitely emerge from samsara. So in the wheel of life, which also presents the whole elaborate teachings on the 12 links, we won't go into huge detail here, but it's there. Outside that presents all the suffering existences in samsara, but above that is the Buddha pointing to the moon. In other words, pointing to the result that comes through traveling the path. The Buddha is saying, this is how you get to there. This is how you get out of it, right? So that becomes the intent of the middle scope practitioner, really wanting to strive for personal liberation on the basis of the fact that I've been in beginningless past lives for countless eons, and it's got me to here, and now I want to use what opportunity I have to go further. And we may have moments of just being able to be aware of this possibility. I guess we do, because here we are. We believe in that. We have some conviction in that. So it's good to reflect on moments that might have occurred in our lives. I always hold in my mind a particular situation where I was sort of helping this guy who was running a training program that I was participating in. And this morning he came up and called me, and I could feel my mind going, like you can see already. And it was sort of like, yeah, Frank, what do you want? I didn't do that, thankfully, but that's how my mind felt. And then I thought, you don't have to react like that. You can drop it. And I dropped it, and I felt so amazing. That was freedom. That was a sense of liberation. So it wasn't permanent. Clearly, here I am still in samsara, believe me, big time. But it gives you that sense of hope. So maybe that's what it feels like, So it was very nice. And Frank was probably happy, because then I did drop it and listen to what he wanted me to do, which wasn't that difficult, really. And what was I expected to do? So it's good to, sort of look for those moments ourselves. So, okay. So in the lamp on the path to enlightenment, Lama Atisha says, those who seek peace for themselves alone. So this is the third noble truth, that we can be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. There can be a cessation of that, a state of bliss, a state of that freedom. We have to ask ourselves, do I believe that for myself? Is this possible? What do we reckon, So you can contemplate like that. So those who seek peace for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures. So this is a reference to the first truth we looked at last time, just very briefly, in terms of person on the small scope, is already turning away from worldly concerns in terms of being concerned about, having one more delicious new taste or new sound, or it's all based on the senses, right? And so turning away from all the pleasures based on the senses, because they're not reliable beyond this life. And in fact, even within this life, they don't last very long usually. And it's not so much as don't enjoy it. While you have it, enjoy it, but don't think it's a source of happiness. So interrogate like that. And then turning away from worldly pleasures. So that also includes, a sense of being respected in the world, or having, people praise us or so forth, looking for that. Turning away from all of that, and from amassing. It's okay to amass wealth in this life. It depends what our intention is. One of the previous directors of a centre in New Zealand said, money is not a dirty word, because he was very good at making money, a brilliant businessman. And that money went into the life-size 21 Tara statues into Dharma purpose, right? So nothing wrong with that, but it's when it's like, it's mine and it's grasping at mine. So like in the 12 links, which again, we'll look at in a much further module, Samsara Nirvana, number 9. The main ones is that propels us into these existences is the craving and grasping. And between craving and grasping, there's a gap. The craving, the wanting, the desire. But then once we've grasped it and it's mine, you know, precious as it. I always think of that in The Lord of the Rings. Precious. I can't believe that they made a whole trilogy about a ring, an obsession with a ring. I mean, come on. Think about it.
Have you ever read the books?
Huh?
Have you ever read the book?
Yeah, I've read the book a long time ago.
About more than just the ring.
My point is, it's about the ring. I'm going to stick with that. Otherwise, my whole debate falls apart. So, and then avoiding, next line, avoiding destructive action. So destructive actions we unpack in the truth of the true origins, karma and afflictions. Already we looked at in the first module, looking mind and its potential. As we're here, we looked at the different mental factors, states of mind, virtuous and non-virtuous, and recognizing. So here we're needing to look at what to abandon and what to practice. So the avoiding of the destructive actions relates to the fourth noble truth, like what to practice. Well, how do I get to attain this state of liberation, of freedom, and so forth? So the aspiration then of the middle scope practitioner is just this: personal liberation, peace, bliss that we call nirvana, the state of nirvana. From a Mahayana presentation, we call it lower nirvana, because then we say, well, full enlightenment is the true freedom and full Buddhahood. So they're not attached to any samsaric pleasures of thinking, oh, be nice in the God realms, living in the cushy suburbs and getting everything, feeling pleasure all the time and so forth. So then we investigate the non-virtuous actions that we need to refrain from. And this we already look at in terms of ethical conduct in relation to taking refuge, for example. But it comes within the small scope of looking at, not killing, not stealing, not lying. So there's the, not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct. So this is the things we're refraining from. Not having divisive speech, not having lying, and not having divisive speech, backbiting, turning one group of people or one person against others, and not engaging in idle chitter-chatter. I always think partly because, well, it said because that's not meaningful speech, but also I think it's a danger zone of them engaging in all the others, and not being abusive, not using harsh speech, abusive speech. In other words, avoiding with our speech things that will do harm. And then, of course, with all of these, we practice the opposites. So instead of killing, saving lives, by whatever means, at least not harming. Buddha said, do no harm, subdue your mind. It's all the teachings right there. Instead of stealing or taking what's not given, of practice of generosity. We say that in the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer, and this comes along then in the Bodhisattva paths and grounds, all practice of all the perfections. We'll be looking that much further down the track. And then not engaging in sexual misconduct. And so the opposite of that is respecting, if we're in a committed relationship, definitely respecting our partner, but also we can extend that out to respecting all beings, so a sense of respect and care and concern. And then in relation to speech, because I think this is the one that we have most opportunity to slip up on, shall we say. instead of lying, being truthful, but not, what do we say, not brutally honest, also being kind. And that's where, instead of harsh speech, being kind in our speech. And being truthful in a way of being exact in our speech, so that we have to be, get very precise. And that's a foundation for wisdom, for developing wisdom. Think like that. And not being divisive in us, instead of being divisive in our speaking, being harmonious, find opportunities to bring groups of people together, to connect people and so forth. So it's not just the absence of divisiveness, it's also, how can I be an agent of harmony and connection for others? So it's really lovely when you really consider it all. And then instead of idle chitter chatter, of having meaningful to speech, then your speech has weight and people listen to you. They take into consideration, they take you seriously and so forth. It doesn't mean don't laugh. Okay, it's okay to laugh. In fact, if you see our lamas, there's a lot, Dalai Lama, when he laughs, it's a whole body laugh. It's not, it's amazing, the whole body laughs. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I remember at Kopan one time, and there was a group from Malaysia. It was when there was long life puja for Rinpoche. And you had one at the end of the course, right? And it's out there in the courtyard. And a group from Malaysia who were there on pilgrimage. And there was, or they called it Southeast Asian rather than Malaysian. So there might have been from other countries as well. And they offered this, actually they used the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer with a tune that was just so beautiful, very beautiful, beautiful tune, not the regular one we have. But there was one young woman in particular, and so Rinpoche is sitting there and they're doing a dance, and she was offering a kata to Rinpoche, but the way that she offered it was a very seductive manner, and then teasing and drawing it away and offering again. Rinpoche, you're sort of sitting there going, that's a bit out there. Rinpoche just went back on his throne and laughed his head off. So they say the best thing is to make your Lama laugh. You can make your Lama laugh. Boy, they made Rinpoche laugh big time. So it's incredibly delightful to watch. So speech. And then with our mind, turning away from the greed, the avarice, the craving, the grasping. And, this is where we turn our mind towards others, or not being malicious or ill will, the mind of revenge, refraining from that, or jealousy. And the opposite of that is, rejoice in the opportunities that other people have and so forth. When people say to me, I'm so jealous of them, I go, no, you're not, you're rejoicing. We can say it so easily, So, no, you're not doing that. Okay. So in brief, the characteristics of a person on the middle scope. So their thoughts, turning away from worldly pleasures, avoiding destructive actions, and the practices they engage in as a result to attain peace, to attain liberation. And this on the basis of remaining, not just abstaining from those non-virtues of body, speech, and mind, but also engaging in any of the 7 levels of vows of individual liberation, pradimoksha vows, which you can say is the refuge vows. So when they say 7 levels, there's the level of, layman, laywoman, and then there's the level of ordination vows, of which there's, the different levels of vows, male and female. And why it's 7 rather than an even number is that between Getzal or novice vows and full ordination for women, there's another step there. So it makes it another one, but you don't have to worry about those. It's the main thing to know if you have taken refuge, or if you're contemplating taking refuge, then to know what to avoid and what to practice. So a middle scope practitioner is looking at the whole of samsara, from the hell realms which we say the hell realms. I always say to my non-Buddhist friends of other religions, particularly Christian, so you only got one hell. We've got like 20 of them. And they're pretty intense, like when you unpack the suffering of the hell realms. I guess the one that I grew up with in the Christian faith would be more like the worst one, the hottest fiery hell of Avicii. So that's seen as, from the bottom of there all the way up to the peak of existence. The peak of existence is a being like in the formless realm, so they don't have this clunky body, and they're in they're in this meditative absorption, such as you might get as a result of this state of liberation, and you're just completely blissful, abiding in that, but not having completely eliminated the self-grasping that you can. I remember Geshe Temple at Institute Lama Tsongkhapa saying, we've all been to the peak of existence. You go, really? I've done all that hard yards and here I am again. So we've had countless lives. We've all been there. And even more so, it makes sense because here we are as Dharma practitioners, saying, yep, I think I can do this. Well, you might not say, I think I can reach that in this life, but why not? No, we don't have to limit ourselves. So having, generated this particular aspiration, this particular goal, motivation, they engage in the paths and practices which will lead to that. Geshe Sharawa explains the main practice of the person of the middling scope is on the basis of the four truths and understanding that. So the worldly pleasures, the suffering, the first noble truth, the destructive actions, the second, the source of suffering, karma and afflictions, second noble truth, peace for selves alone, cessation of suffering, third noble truth, and avoiding destructive actions is the antidote, the paths. And we present that in different ways. So just turn here to our outline. So in relation to the first noble truth, so the Buddha said, we have to know what that is. We have to know what sufferings and levels of sufferings there are. When I was, I don't know, at some point my mother did she was into doing family histories and things like that. So she did our family history and came up with our family motto, or she had investigated, had and the shield that you have, or I don't know if anybody else's family has done that. And the motto was learn to suffer. And I was like, great, thanks, Mum. And then I met the teaching on the four truths, and it doesn't say learn to suffer. It's learn that you are suffering and how that suffering is. So we have to distinguish here, because people say, oh, you Buddhists are all morbid, like you're always talking about suffering and death. We're talking about the realities of existence, the condition of our lives, particularly the bits we don't want to talk about, I guess. So the truth of suffering, the Buddha said, is to be identified, is to be known. So we look at this in many different presentations. So we have the 7 or 8 types of suffering. And this was, when the Buddha first, as I say, snuck out from the palace, living in the lap of luxury up there in the absorption of the formless realms, maybe, and snuck out a few times, and without going through each single time, seeing the suffering of birth. He hadn't, I suppose you could go for a long time without seeing a birth and seeing the suffering that incurs along with that. Occurs, we see the brand new baby and we think, oh, isn't that beautiful? But there's a lot of suffering involved in giving birth, just ask any mother. But birth itself, I always have this, it's a joke I have with myself, but I share it with other people, that when the baby cries, it's crying because it goes, oh no, I've done it again, I'm back in samsara. Anyway, it's a joke, right? So birth and then aging, and aging from a Buddhist perspective starts at the point of conception, because we get the sperm and ovum from our parents. So they give us the physical, and the basis for the physical body, but our mind comes along ourselves, and that it said that at the time of that sort of sexual act, the mind zaps in there. Don't ask me how, but it zaps in there. Well, there's a whole, when I say don't ask me how, there's a very elaborate presentation of that as well. Death, intermediate state, and rebirth, how it all happens. And it's the moment when the mind conjoins with the ovum and sperm that life begins. This is the Buddhist presentation. And so, in other words, can't blame mum and dad for our mind. Okay, they gave us the body, but not the mind. We did that ourselves. Like when my mother, I had an argument with my mother when I was a teenager. Well, probably more than one, but this one was, I was so annoyed. I was like, "Oh, I didn't ask to be born." And she said, "Well, I didn't ask to have you." As a good Catholic mum, she was right, but I was wrong. When I met the Buddhist teaching, I realized, well, actually, I did ask to be born. So there you go. But that aging occurs from that moment of conception, which is why that comes next. It always intrigued me why aging came before sickness, because that's why, because it comes from that moment of conception. We think about aging as happening sometime later in life, you know, but we're aging moment by moment by moment. Sickness, we're all familiar with the suffering of sickness, our own, others, and so forth. Death itself is a suffering. We don't need to, that's self-evident. These are self-evident. So we contemplate each one of these, just like the Buddha did. And then the Buddha's first teaching on the Four Truths, the first aspect of that was on impermanence of ourselves, impermanence of everything, getting down to the most subtle level. That comes along with the teaching on the First Noble Truth. And then meeting with the unpleasant. We don't want to have any unpleasant experiences whatsoever. Being separated from the pleasant experiences, objects of pleasure or so forth. We also don't like that. And not getting what we want. I think if you look at babies from a young age, there's a few tantrums that occur when you don't get what you want. I just feel sorry for parents in supermarkets where their kids go, "Oh, I want this, why don't you give me this?" I don't know what strategies are there. Maybe you can share the strategies for that. But that comes, it comes along as the package, doesn't it? So that's the 7 types, but we can also add 8. Sometimes it's presented as 8 sufferings of human beings specifically, and that's of the aggregates, our body and mind, being themselves in the nature of suffering. So it gets to a more subtle level. And we can say all of this is summarized in when we look at the 3 types of suffering. So the obvious manifest suffering that we share with all other beings in terms of, not just sickness, aches and pains and so forth, the grief, the separation. It's common, really manifest levels of mental suffering, physical suffering, and so forth. That's experienced by all living beings, but here, as a human being, we can contemplate the ways in which we do that, and indeed, this is what we're asked to do. And the most subtle, and then the suffering, the second level, suffering of change. This is the suffering of what we think is going to give us happiness at some point turns into, or appears to turn into suffering. So, example, you're sitting here nice, comfortably, right? I hope so. Yes. If I say, okay, keep sitting here without moving for 24 hours, already yes, exactly. The thought of that is like, you've got to be joking. And so the Buddha would say it's already a suffering. It's not like it was, there was an absence of suffering, and then it turned into suffering. The Buddha said it was already there because, the nature of change. So then we say, okay, that's all right, stand up, or we might do it naturally or wriggle or whatever. And that's feels like freedom from suffering. That actually, as the Buddha said, it's only a relief from that manifest level of suffering of sitting. But if I equally said stand there for 24 hours, again, we'd be like, you've got to be joking, that's torture. So you'd probably collapse. And they see in some of the actually using that as torture, where people were, I'm just thinking in some documentaries I've seen where people, and they had to stand there and not move, or usually in the hot sun or something. So it's definitely torture. So we can apply this to absolutely everything, in the sense of everything subject to change, everything being impermanent. It's a more subtle level of understanding suffering. And the most subtle level is understanding that no matter where you're reborn in samsara, the pervasive suffering of conditionality, of conditioning, or conditioned suffering based on having these, we say, contaminated aggregates, which means the body and mind propelled by our karma, our ignorance, our confusion. So this polluted mind that's not in sync with reality. And this is why the Buddha says we continue to suffer no matter where we're reborn. So this is a very, very subtle level that is much harder for us to access. Okay, and then, so often that's presented as, okay, it's all summarized there, but then also we can look at the 6 types of suffering. It's just like, really? We're just looking at all these different types of suffering, because we have to identify what that is. We have to be clear in our mind what it is. So the suffering of the indefinite nature, the unreliability of samsaric pleasures. So whatever happiness they bring to our lives, however long that lasts, even it might be for the whole of this life, because it's based on the senses, we're going to lose that at the time of death. I look at my parents were married for 63 years, only separated by death of one of them. Now, I can't say that whole time was happy. I certainly witnessed times when it wasn't all happy, but yet nonetheless, there was some sort of underlying, they never, oh no, it's not true. One time my mother was going to leave. My sister told me. My sister told me when I was 13, my mother was going to leave my father, and she was going to take me with her. I said, I don't care who comes and goes, I'm going to stay in the house. Anyway, none of that happened. They stayed together. They worked it out. I mean, people work it out. But still, death had to separate them. Thank you very much. I won't go with you yet. You go on ahead. Yeah, so it happens. The suffering of dissatisfaction, and in fact, when we talk about the truth of suffering, really what the Buddha was talking about, dukkha, is this mind of discontent, of dissatisfaction, of never satisfied. We have this sort of constant striving for new or bigger or better samsaric pleasures and experiences and so forth. And it's where Lama Zopa Rinpoche says there's no new taste in samsara, we've had them all, so forget all these new things they try to sell you. I can't believe the amount of different tastes they're trying to sell us. It's like, good enough, right? And the suffering of leaving the body again and again, which we call death, itself a suffering. And the suffering of joining with suffering again and again when we're reborn into another body. The suffering of rising and falling. This means that within samsara, it's not like things get better, 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 better. I mean, the Hindu presentation is sort of more like that. It says, you know, once you're born human, then it only ever improves. So the Buddha says, well, that doesn't make sense, because it depends what you do with that life. And if you create more suffering and causes of suffering for yourself and others, the conclusion is you're setting yourself up for more suffering in the future, right? In future lives, because of the continuity of consciousness and laying those imprints on your mind. So logically, we investigate that. So it's arising and falling. The Buddha said, meeting, you know, everything, meeting ends with parting, and life itself ends in death. You know, we're reborn up here, we're reborn down there, depending on what we do. And the suffering of loneliness, or being without a helper at the time of death, that we die alone, the sense of aloneness at that time. So this is the presentation on the 6 forms of suffering. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that it's particularly good to meditate on the first 2. So perhaps we could stop now and do some meditation, just a brief meditation on this in relation to these first 2 levels of suffering. So you want to sit comfortably, well supported by the ground below. Bringing your awareness into the space of your body, just resting in the natural breath in, breath out, natural rhythm of your breath. Bring body to mind together in this meditation. In which we're contemplating the suffering of the indefinite nature of samsaric pleasures, the uncertainty and unreliability, and not finding satisfaction, the point of always constantly craving dissatisfied mind. So think about when we do follow an object of desire, be that a person, a taste, anything based on any of the senses, whatever desire, and expect to have satisfaction from that, or even our aspirations, our goals of this life. So think about that when we expect to have satisfaction, but the result is dissatisfaction. We can call to mind some examples from our experience. So we hope for satisfaction. We try once more. I'll do it again. I'll try again. I'll try another relationship. I'll try another job, whatever it is, to fulfill the desires. I'll do it again. I'll try again. So following desire, to see where that has led us in terms of times when disturbing negative thoughts arise, maybe jealousy, maybe pride, frustration, misery, to get a sense of again and again, there's no end of the ways in which suffering manifests, afflictions manifest in our mind. Let's contemplate and relate to your own life experience. Contemplating in this way, thinking like this, we can keep our morality pure. As Lama Atisha said, the enjoyment of pleasures stemming from desire is as empty as reflected moonlight. As fleeting as an echo. As illusory as a mirage. As dependent as a reflection. Into this vast ocean of pleasures, the rivers of birth, decay, sickness, and death flow unceasingly. In the past, I was bound by the karmic power of impure deeds. But today, I'm able to fulfill this life, so why not seek after Dharma? In this way, we can keep our morality pure and rejoice in the opportunities we have to practice. Okay, relax. So we can meditate again and again, reflect again and again on the different types of suffering, particularly the pervasive suffering, that no matter where we're reborn, we'll be in the nature of suffering. It's the most subtle one, the hardest one to get at, really. But I think if we look at it in the context of the second noble truth, because the Four Noble Truths come in pairs. First it says the result is suffering. Where does that come from? The truth of origin or cause of suffering is from our karma that propels us into existence, but also the deluded states of mind, the afflictions. And so this is where is very helpful to investigate, these causes. Karma is motivated by the afflicted states of mind and propels these 12 links, which is really an elaboration on true origins. It's sort of unpacking it even more. It's a quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's a little bit lengthy. Let's go back here. Yeah. So question to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, this is in the book Dalai Lama at Harvard. Candrila, who gave us the advice for the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, when she was at Vajrayana Institute and people went to see her for consultations, and they'd come out and say, Candrila's advised me to read the book Tibetan History and Culture. I'm like, Googled it, couldn't find it. I don't know what book that is. And subsequently, forget the Geshe's name, but he was from the Institute of Tibetan Works Library. What is it? Tibetan Library of Works and Archives. Anyway, so he was visiting us, and I was mentioning to him that there was a difficulty finding this book, and he goes, I saw it on your bookshelves, in the library, in the bookshop. I went, really? Can you point it out to me? He goes, there it is, Dalai Lama in Harvard. And I said, that's a very different title. And he said, oh, Candrila would have been referring to the Tibetan book, the one in Tibetan, and they just use any old English name and put it on. Thanks. So at least now I knew what book to tell people to read. So that was it, Dalai Lama at Harvard. Not quite sure why they put that title, but anyway. So this question came, how can we perceive or know the fact of cyclic existence? And His Holiness saying, this is difficult. So if you find it difficult, His Holiness is saying it's difficult. There is a continuum of mental and physical aggregates under the influence of contaminated actions and afflictive emotions. So that's the truth of origin, truth of cause, true cause. In order to establish its existence, one has to understand how these mental and physical aggregates come to be a basis for suffering by way of former actions, past karma. To do this, one must understand how contaminated actions and afflictive emotions come to be. One must understand how an unbroken continuum of such exists. We've done that meditation on, attempt to get that sense of continuity of consciousness, tracking back. If one were logically proving the existence of cyclic existence, one would state the reasons which then would have to be established individually. The contaminated actions and afflictive emotions exist in general. They have a connection with our mind and with our experiences of pleasurable and painful effects. And there is an unbroken and beginningless continuum of consciousness between lives, that the mental and physical aggregates are impelled by contaminated actions and afflictive actions, which have existed unbrokenly from lifetime to lifetime. And they have a nature of suffering and serves as a basis for suffering. The root of all this meets back to a mistaken awareness, which perceives the nature of phenomena wrongly. So having wrong views, we call that the mind of ignorance or confusion. Once it is established that these thoroughly afflicted phenomena are generated with a mistaken consciousness as a root, it can be understood that with this mistaken consciousness, once it's removed, the afflictive emotions generated in dependence on it are also removed. And the contaminated actions generated in dependence on them are also removed. And through that, birth in cyclic existence is produced in dependence upon contaminated action, And through that birth in cyclic existence that is produced, independence upon contaminated actions is overcome. So this is in reference to the 12 links. As I said, we'll have a fuller presentation longer, how to reverse that cycle. Okay. Got it? Well, not really. Did you just say that again? Okay, so the second noble truth, when we look at this, is we're looking at the afflictions, and it's not, you know, the good news is we don't have to go through every single one and find their antidotes, although that's very useful in the meantime to find the antidotes for our hatred, our arrogance, our deluded views, and so forth. And so we learn about to identify those, that this is in fact a deluded view, this is a wrong view, and how do I be free of that? How do I cultivate correct view, right view? Another reference here. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, if one does not think of the source of suffering, the second noble truth, the gateway to samsara, one cannot properly know the eradication of samsara. So this is why we look at it. This is what I have to be free of. These are the states of mind I have to be free of, because our actions and our speech follow from whatever arises in our mind, our thoughts. You know, the thought precedes the deed, precedes the word, and so forth. One cannot properly know the eradication of samsara, be moved to renounce its existence, weary of it, and cherish the knowledge of what binds one to samsara. So here we can reflect again and again on the true suffering, and not the true suffering, the origin of suffering, by looking at all the different afflicted states of mind, familiarize ourselves with whatever ones are particularly prevalent in my mind, and how to transform that. Like, for example, we talk about transforming anger into compassion or loving kindness or patience and so forth, using an antidotal, completely opposite state of mind in order to chip away at it and change our mind state. Right? And here again, we have the pair of the third noble truth of cessation of suffering, which is that we can be free of it all, because otherwise we might say, well, I can't be free of it all, nothing I can do. Well, no, it's not fatalism, because everything's impermanent, subject to change, so we can change. So the truth of cessation of suffering, just as described here, the remainderless fading away, cessation, giving up, relinquishing, freedom from, and non-reliance on the origin of suffering. So it's relinquishing those things that are going to cause us suffering lifetime to lifetime. Do we think it's possible? Yes, good. We're on the right page, okay. And so this pair is sort of like, okay, this is your goal, this is what you want to achieve. Here in the presentation of the middle scope, it's in terms of renouncing samsara, striving for individual liberation. A Mahayana practitioner will say, well, I'm striving for Buddhahood. And so then we look at, well, how do I do that? And that's the truth of the path. That's the whole of what we're investigating in terms of the whole of the graduated path to enlightenment. So that's how we look at this presentation and all the subsequent modules and so forth, looking at that. It's water, thankfully. I thought it was doing well. I hadn't dropped or spilt anything. There you go. It's a bit of a blessing. That's good. It's wonderful. Okay, so we look at what is called the Eightfold Noble Path. This is what was presented by the Buddha in that first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. So we've mentioned the Lam Rim, which we follow on and investigate in future modules, which is all of this here on the three scopes. And the Buddha represented a noble eightfold path. Actually, the word noble, either noble truths or noble eightfold path, when it says noble, it means this is evident to Arya beings, those beings who have developed these realizations, have a direct realization of reality as it is, not with all our confused mind and all these afflictions and so forth. They've eliminated all of those. And so for them, this is all self-evident. For us, it sort of takes a bit of convincing and identifying and so forth. The Buddha said that the first truth is to be identified, known. The second truth is to be abandoned. The third truth is to be achieved. And the fourth to be followed. That's how you get to number 3. So Noble Eightfold Path. So then we unpack, well, what is all of this? And as I say, it's evident for an Arya being, but it doesn't mean you have to wait until you get there to practice it, because in doing this, you get there. So having the right view is having the mind that's in sync with reality, correct view that isn't caught up with all these different ways in which we elaborate. And this is really how we develop the wisdom mind, that more and more we think about, particularly the ways that we think that, you know, our body in particular is the source of pleasure and purity and so forth. And we see that that's wrong. And so there's investigations we do around, you know, looking at what's called the perishing aggregates, our body and mind. I would say as I get older, it's very evident that my aggregates are perishing, particularly the physical, which is only one, right? Or maybe the mind is too, actually. Just saying. So having the right view in terms of cultivating this wisdom mind, and we need to look at this in terms of the Buddha's unique teaching on dependent arising, that everything's interdependent. We see things as unitary, permanent, you know, and the Buddha said, no, it's all impermanent, it's all compounded. So everything that comes into existence can't be permanent, it has to go out of existence, and it comes into existence depending on many causes and conditions and so forth. So we unpack that and to get our understanding, our view more in sync with reality. And along with that wisdom mind is the one of right intention. So having the right intention in terms of, oh, also I have to say right view, is a right view in terms of positing the Four Noble Truths. So that originally we have that through, you know, listening, hearing the teachings and so forth, and taking it as a working basis, but then eventually deepening that understanding. So we have a direct understanding, we'll get to be an Arya being, a direct understanding of these to be self-evident truths, obvious truths, right? And the right resolve or right intention in sync with, not just the Four Noble Truths, also things like karma, cause and effect. We get that at a manifest level, but getting it at more and more subtle levels then really informs how we act in the world, how, you know, we really see the consequences of our karmic actions, which is not just about what we've brought with us from the past, but what am I doing now in terms of creating, what states of mind and experiences am I creating for myself in the future? and that we have a choice there. So this right intention, we say, we correct our motivation at the beginning of our day. We set our motivation in the right direction. So the minimum is do no harm. Our intention is to do no harm, to engage in harmlessness. So as the Buddha said, do no harm. And then, of course, those of us, when we recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayers, we said with Mahayana motivation is where we can benefit. So not just do no harm, but where I can be of benefit. So we investigate that and how we check throughout the day. Am I still in sync with that motivation I set at the beginning of the day? This is where Lama Atisha's particular practice of Vajrasattva, like we do a Vajrasattva practice here once a month on a Saturday afternoon together. But to Lama Atisha would be, any time he saw an affliction, having identified what an afflicted state of mind is, when he saw that arising in his mind, straight away he'd stop. And if he was even riding his horse, he'd get off his horse, he'd have this little stupor, he'd get down and do Vajrasattva practice, purify the mind immediately, because the understanding that karma multiplies. So not wanting it festering away and causing greater harm in the future. So he was right onto it straight away. Now, we're not riding horses. Well, you might be. But to be able to nip it in the bud as soon as we identify that in our mind and reset and correct our motivation, set ourselves back on course, right? And this right view and right motivation comes then the foundation, the basis of our ethical discipline, how we act, which we've already discussed in terms of refraining from 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues. But here we can, it's summarized in looking at the right speech, which we've already discussed, speech that is beneficial, that's harmonious, that's truthful. And also, and kind. Also, I think, when not to engage in speech, there were particular times when the Buddha remained silent on particular topics or so forth, because maybe it was the wrong time or so forth. We know this with people around us, when we think, oh, I'm going to tell them this, and then you realize, actually, I don't think this is either helpful. We reflect and, of course, in the privacy of ourselves, and we might rehearse all sorts of conversations we're going to have with people, that perhaps is useful that we abandon some of those. Let's just say, it's just like, well, I didn't say that because it really wasn't appropriate in the situation. So this is where we can investigate that, to saying, is this beneficial? Is this the right time? Is it, the right context? Do I have even the right way to skillfully say what's helpful? And right action is everything we do on the basis of the body, that it be helpful, beneficial, not threaten, like I think I mentioned yesterday that, by engaging in, practices and so forth, maybe reciting mantras and things like that, that at least I feel that from my side, I hope they agree with me, the ants on the path feel like I'm not a threat to them, or the birds feel like I'm not a threat to them. That, by engaging in as much as we can purity of our action and our intention and our speech, that we're putting out a positive energy that other beings respond to. If you just look at His Holiness Dalai Lama, well, at least when he was traveling around, and, tens of thousands of people gravitate towards that amazing energy, right? That amazing being, that amazing energy, they're drawn by that. And so you can see that's a result of His Holiness practice. And, the good vibes. Everyone wants to soak up the good vibes. You don't have to be Buddhist, you have to believe in any of that, but you want the good vibes, right?
I heard that I saw a thing saying Mission Joy was, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu was available again to watch freely, but I think it's only if you're in Europe. No, again, right now. Yeah, I'll have to try harder. I did press some link on YouTube. Yeah, Mission Joy. I sort of watched it a couple of times this year, and I feel like I'm ready for another dose of joy. Yes, we're always all ready for another dose of joy. It's very infectious, right? And so, right livelihood is thinking, okay, whatever way I earn a living, is this harmful? What are some ways that would be harmful to earn a living?
Selling tobacco.
Selling tobacco, or engaging in any illegal drugs as well. Definitely, or maybe even alcohol. We don't think about those, do we? I couldn't believe it that with lockdown, the first thing people wanted was the grog shop, and it was an essential service.
Yeah.
We got closed down, but the grog shops were essential services. It's like something wrong in this world. Yeah, producing weapons of destruction, which may be a contradiction in terms, because weapons are usually for destruction, aren't they? Yeah, so we can think of many ways like that. So having the fortune to be able to choose how we, and right livelihood, of any livelihood that's bringing benefit to others. Of course, we say the helping professions, but we also look at, working at the supermarket or so forth. You're providing food for people, you're helping them, so forth. Yeah, so investigate that. Right effort. Now, the next few, right effort, right mindfulness, right mental unification comes into our meditation practice or our Dharma practice in terms of putting the right amount of effort in, but joyously, a right attitude towards the effort we're putting in. We can elaborate on all of these much more, there's huge teachings on these. And then cultivating right mindfulness, which we have the classic presentation on the 4 close applications of mindfulness, mindfulness of the body, or the body of the breath, or the body itself, and there's many meditations there, on feelings, sort of awareness of physical sensations in our body, our tendency to go towards the pleasant and have an aversion towards the unpleasant, and realizing that's happening all day, every day. But also we can think about it and the states of mind. That's where very useful to be aware of what states of mind I'm engaging with and wish to engage with, and deliberately cultivating the positive ones. And gaining a sense of awareness of all of phenomena. Also, as Geshe Dawa said at our first Mind and Its Potential conference, if you want to get enlightened, practice mindfulness. And this is like in your daily activities. Can I stay present with what is? Get up in the morning and stay present with what is, and see how long that lasts throughout the day, and reset. Oh, yes, come back to the present moment, because the mind's always going on ahead, or what's going to happen later, or going on or over what happened previously, and bring ourselves back. And right mental unification in terms of concentration and wisdom, it comes back to the right view. So it's sort of like a circular, I think about it like a circular effect. So, and as I said, there's many extensive teachings about that, but we can see that that's summarized in the 3 higher trainings. So the 3 higher trainings, again, is common ground for all levels of practice. And we could say that, we practice this regardless of, whether we regard ourselves as a Mahayana practitioner or as seeking personal liberation. These are necessary. So we can say that those 3 higher trainings are summarized here under ethical discipline, which is the Eightfold Noble Path is summarized here. So ethical discipline in terms of our action, our speech, our livelihood, and then our meditative concentration, our developing concentration and wisdom through analysis, which also includes having the right view, right intention, and so forth. So this becomes then the foundation for our practice of the path leading to liberation. So that, in summary, is the Four Truths. Questions, comments? Okay. So I just read a verse from Lama Tsongkhapa about how do you know when you've arrived? But how do I know when I've achieved this? After such meditations, when you do not long for the splendors of samsara for even a moment, oh yeah, a bit of a way to go. When your thoughts day and night always yearn for liberation. Day and night means when you're asleep as well. You have developed renunciation, definite emergence, the wish to be definitely free of samsara. So we can see there's, a lot of practice to be done, not to beat ourselves up because we're on the path, we're doing our best and want to do our best. So it's good to be able to also identify, as I said, those moments when we have that experience, like I did very momentarily, have that experience, and to be able to increase that gap, of that experience, so that we're able to abide there for longer and longer, to bring our mind more in sync with reality. Yeah, that's why we do our meditation practices and so forth. So this is the middle scope practitioner. You can see it's rather huge goal. So we'll leave it there, and we'll have a couple of weeks break as I'm away. And then next time we will go on with the great scope. In the meantime, I just wanted to mention, announcement. So this is, I'm sure people are aware, Reconciliation Week is traditionally at this time, and just in Sydney, they had the faith leaders endorsement of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and for that to be implemented. And we're all asked, like we signed that a couple of months ago, and to be presented like that. Anyway, so where am I going with this? So I think, just as in terms of acknowledgement of our shared heritage, I just wanted to mention, I think I have previously, that there's an Aboriginal elder, Michael Wright, who has invited us to join him to sit on country, which we did on Friday, which is an area in Kings Park near the War Memorial. That's where we sort of meet around there. And next time we'll be doing that is the 17th of June at 1:30 p.m. And Michael mentioned on Friday that he'll write up something that we can put out in the newsletter. I don't know which newsletter that will go in, but just about that. He's actually part of the more connected with the Zen Center, and they go once a month on a first Sunday of the month. I said, I can't get there on a Sunday because when I'm in town, we're here, right? So he thought for us to have a special time for anyone who's interested to join. It's quite a nice thing to do. We meet there at 1:30 and we do some meditation, and then we go off to the coffee shop. Have a, well-earned time in the coffee shop, because you've got to do that as well. not that it's anything to do with samsara, but, you know, enjoy it while it lasts. Okay, we'll dedicate. We'll dedicate. And I also invite you to, you know, if you're to continue to recite the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. I found it really wonderful to do walking, driving. Anytime I've got the opportunity, I'm doing something else. I don't really have to pay, you know, 100% attention to, or at least I can recite it at the same time and accumulate more over these next 2 months, Candrela said, which also coincides with this whole month of Vesak or Sakadawa that we celebrate on the 14th of June. Actually, it goes a bit longer than that, but this period of commemorating the Buddha's birth. Thank you very much for coming into this world and teaching, enlightenment and passing into parinirvana. So it's a very special time, you know, for us as Buddhist practitioners. Okay, so dedicate, page 28. Through the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the precious body mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you, everybody. Stay well.